The United Conservative Party leadership contest continues with the new party choosing its new leader on October the 28th. It's a three-horse race now since Jeff Callaway dropped out, throwing his support behind this gentleman here, Jason Kenney. Thanks for joining me on Bridge City News.
Good to be here. Thanks very much.
You bet. Now there were the three of you, okay? We've got Brian Jean, Doug Schweitzer, and Brian Jean was in our studio a little while ago, and he discussed that he is the right man for the job. Nobody else. Brian Jean is the guy. So let me ask you the same question, Jason. Why are you the right man for the job?
Well, I tend not to talk like that, first of all, and I certainly, unlike Brian, don't refer to myself in the third person, so you won't catch me doing that. But I do think we're going to need to pick a leader for this party who will be ready to be premier on day one, somebody with a relevant mix of experience, skills, and temperament. And so what I offer people is a lifetime of, I think, relevant experience. I helped to start the Alberta Taxpayers Association 26 years ago as a young whippersnapper to fight for fiscal responsibility at a time when that was desperately needed. Went on to become president of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, took the same fight national. So I've been fighting on Alberta fiscal policy and fiscal policy generally for my entire life, for lower taxes and balanced budgets, my entire adult life. And then I offer the experience I had as a senior minister in Stephen Harper's cabinet, 5 years Minister of Immigration, where I brought in tough, challenging reforms to a broken immigration system, Minister of Employment, who created incentives for people to go into apprenticeship training, Minister of National Defense, who deployed our military to fight the genocidal terrorists of ISIS in the Middle East, Chairman of the Operations Committee of Cabinet, Minister for Multiculturalism, leading a project that doubled the support for New Canadians for the Conservative Party.
So you have a little bit of experience under your belt, is that what
you're telling me? A little bit is what
Okay.
I'm saying, and not just that, but the last 16 months of working on this Unity project.
Now, when I worked on the Hill, Parliament Hill in Ottawa, as a national parliamentary reporter, and I remember the Jason Kenney, was sitting there at QP question period. Liberals and NDP would throw questions, you'd get up, start laughing at them, and they would kind of laugh back or whatever. But I found you were a bit of a pit bull. Like, let's go right at it, let's butt the heads, let's go right at it. A lot of Albertans think, hey, this will really resonate with me because he'll fight for me in Ottawa, for the average Albertan. Yeah. But some other people are like, I don't know, the guy's he's too brash, it's not going to work for me. So how do you balance that, for Albertans?
Well, I think what people are looking for is somebody to fight for this province against Justin Trudeau and his government's attacks on our province. Right now we have a government that's acting more like a lapdog for Ottawa than a watchdog for Alberta. We need a premier who, like Peter Lougheed, when he stood up to Pierre Trudeau's national energy program, will stand up to this Prime Minister Trudeau's attacks against our energy industry, the federal carbon tax, the shutdown of Energy East, the changes of regulations at the National Energy Board, the unfair equalization formula. So I make no bones about it. We're going to need somebody who has the strength and the ability to stand up to Justin Trudeau. Fortunately, he was my critic in opposition for 3 years. I know him very well, and I invite anybody to go online and look at the debates where Justin and I had exchanges back and forth, and they can draw their own conclusions about who got the better of those.
Now, some of the media are saying this race is turning into a junior high melodrama. How do you respond to that?
Well, I don't think that's true. Some political reporters always want to promote conflict, and wherever they see some, they'll kind of amplify it, they'll expand it. I think they were talking about some peculiar things that one of my opponents said at a recent debate. But basically, I think in context, this has been a pretty positive and respectful leadership election, and there's a reason for that. This is a new party based on the idea of unity, trying to overcome a decade of division. And I think the members are sending the leadership candidates a strong message not to risk the unity post-leadership. They want us to be united regardless of who wins. And I've said from day one, if someone else is chosen by the members, they will have my total enthusiastic support. People like me have got to be prepared to park our egos. And I hope and believe the inverse is true.
I'm glad you brought that up because when I covered the Ontario PC leadership race with Monty McDonald, Christine Elliott, and Patrick Brown, it was quite interesting because when Christine Elliott didn't win, even though she had the support of John Baird and other people, she basically said, packed up and went home. And that's it. She left politics. I'm out. That's it. So I'm wondering, will that be the same for Jason? Like, you didn't leave to support somebody with UCP. No. You want to be leader and eventually be premier.
No, the reason I did this whole project, I gave up one of the safest seats in the House of Commons and my only paycheck over a year ago was because somebody had to step forward with a clear plan to unite the warring Conservative factions in Alberta. Otherwise, we risked handing the NDP a vote split that could lead to a disastrous second socialist term in Alberta. I was not prepared to watch my entire kind of life's work helping to build up the Conservative movement in this country be jeopardized in this province because of the pointless division between PCs and Wild Rosers. And so that's why I stepped into this. Somebody had to be a catalyst for unity. Somebody had to bring together the grassroots free enterprise Albertans who did not tolerate this decade of division any longer. That's why I'm in this. And at the end of the day, if someone else is chosen leader, that's fine. I'll support that person. The key thing is that we replace the NDP, do the heavy lifting to undo the damage of their policies to the province, renew the Alberta advantage, restore investor confidence, restore economic growth, get our province back on track.
Now, the NDP here in Alberta still have their supporters. We know that. The economy is slowly turning around. GDP last quarter increase of 4.6%. And you can be sure as the election is coming up, they're going to be handing out those pre-election goodies to everybody, all these Albertans. So it's not going to be a cakewalk. This might not be a one-and-done mandate, as some people think with the NDP. So you can have some challenges here. How do you address those challenges?
We don't take anything for granted, obviously. We're going to have to earn every vote, stay humble, and earn it. But you know, the reality is the majority of Albertans believe that you cannot redistribute wealth without creating it in the first place. They understand that you cannot tax and borrow your way to prosperity. They understand that this carbon tax is not only the biggest tax increase in Alberta history, but also the biggest lie in Alberta political history. The NDP didn't mention it in the last campaign. They understand this recession has been longer and deeper than it had to be because of anti-growth policies of the NDP, that tens of billions of dollars of investment has fled the province. 200,000 Albertans are out of work. We've gone from brain gain to brain drain. People get that. So listen, we're going to stay humble and work hard, but I'm confident if we do that we will make this NDP government one and done, defeated in the next election.
So how are you going to get more Albertans working? Would it be tax breaks for small business? Small business employs 75 to 80% of Albertans or Canadians across the country. What are your thoughts?
Well, there's not a lot that you can do in terms of cutting small business tax rate in Alberta because it's already just 2%. But what we would do is focus on restoring economic growth and investor confidence. In the summer of 2019, right after the next election, I would hold a special extraordinary summer session of the legislature for what I call the Summer of Repeal. We would begin with Bill number 1, the Carbon Tax Repeal Act. We would get our other tax rates down as quickly as we can, publish a credible plan to balance the budget because the big deficits also scare away investment. I would appoint a minister whose sole task is reducing the red tape and regulatory burden of the Alberta government by a third, speeding up the approvals process. Because a lot of the oil and gas investment that has fled has done so because of our increasingly, it can take over a year to get something approved in Alberta that's approved in Texas in a week or two. So also we would stop the NDP's increase in labor prices, stop their shutdown of our coal plants, which are going to triple or quadruple our power prices, get the economic fundamentals right, fight like heck for these pipelines so we can get a fair global price for our oil and gas products, and that's just the beginning.
So Energy East, let's talk a bit about that.
Sure.
Is there something more that Rachel Notley and the NDP could have done? I mean, 1.1 million barrels going out to central Canada. We're talking tens of thousands of jobs lost,
Yes.
even for central Canadians, in Ontario
Yes.
and Quebec. What more could have been done?
Well, anything would have been more than what they did, which was nothing. They just typically passive about this, and the Premier has blamed market prices for the Energy East being shut down when TransCanada Pipeline, the company building or proposing to build Energy East, said clearly in their statement on September the 7th that they were pausing and ultimately they killed the project because of regulatory uncertainty. Because in August, the National Energy Board suddenly changed the rules of the game halfway through. That company had already spent $1 billion on the approvals process. Suddenly, the Energy Board said, well, hold on a second. We're now going to do an assessment of the up and downstream carbon emissions from this pipeline. Well, guess what? Pipelines don't emit carbon. They transport oil. The oil is burned by, things like cars that are built with subsidies in Ontario and airplanes that are built with subsidies in Quebec. So what the NDP could have done was to taken the National Energy Board to court and say that the regulation of upstream emissions of the production of oil and gas is provincial jurisdiction that was established in the Constitution by Peter Lougheed in 1982. And they should have fought for that ground and demanded that the federal government rein in the National Energy Board. They should still do that. And if the federal government doesn't, then we should demand changes to the equalization formula.
Let's talk a bit about minimum wage increase. 2019, a lot of small business owners I've chatted with saying, look, I'm going to have to lay off staff, I'm going to have to increase the price of my products here to remain competitive. 2019, $15 an hour, Ontario and here in Alberta. But then I talk to my kids, younger. I'm getting a living wage, $15 an hour. Yes, score! So how do you respond to both sides?
Well, $0 an hour is not a minimum, is not a living wage. And that's the problem. According to the C.D. Howe Institute, the 50% increase in the minimum wage in the middle of a recession is going to kill about 25,000 jobs in Alberta. According to a recent study out of the University of Waterloo, a 10% increase in the minimum wage kills about 2% of jobs for youth and immigrants. So a 50% increase, probably a 10% reduction in employment for those folks trying to find their first job. This is a job killer. And so why would you raise the price of hiring people in a recession when people are being laid off? It's the triumph of ideology over data and over common sense. I would stop it right now because it's a job killer. But it will be fully implemented before the next election, and I can see no realistic way that our party could propose to roll it back. So we'd have to find support for small businesses in other ways, like perhaps a hiring credit for new employees.
I'm going to ask you a very difficult question now. Something's going to be very hard for you to answer. Okay, you ready for this?
For sure.
What has Rachel Notley and the NDP, what have they done right?
Okay, well,
okay, what have they done right?
I've got an idea.
Okay, what have they done right?
One thing is they've clamped down on excessive pay and compensation for people serving on agencies, boards, and commissions, which I think is good. They're right now doing a study of reviewing compensation for the administration at our universities. We have some university presidents making, 4 times what the prime minister is paid. That seems totally unreasonable.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I support what they've done in that respect.
Okay. Now, there's some talk as well from Albertans. I mean, I'm born and raised in Calgary myself. I'm a native Albertan. And even when I was a kid, when Pierre Elliott Trudeau was Prime Minister of Canada, there was talk of the West separating. Guess what? It's back. The West wants to talk about separating again. Yeah. BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, we're gone. We're out of here. So what do you say to those that want to succeed? They want to secede from Canada. What do you say to them?
Well, first, you're bang on. Listen, I have been hearing in the last few weeks or months more voluble support for Alberta or Western separatism than I've heard in my entire adult life. It is worse than I think it's been at least since the early 1980s with the National Energy Program. And there's a whole number of reasons for this, but it concerns me deeply. I guess what I would say to those who advocate Western or Alberta separation is that won't help us get our products to market. If we create even bigger barriers between ourselves and the rest of Canada, we're going to be even more hemmed in terms of accessing global markets for oil and gas. And moreover, the majority of Albertans don't support this idea. Never make a threat that you can't follow through on. That just weakens your hand. And thirdly, I would say, look, Canada is a great country, but it's imperfect. And one of its imperfections is the unfairness with which Alberta has been treated, like through equalization. And we need to fight for fairness. Let's focus our energies on positive change rather than this kind of agenda that leads us nowhere.
I'm glad you brought that up with the equalization payments. How are we going to make Alberta a have province again from a have-not province?
Well, technically we are still a have province, although we have higher unemployment than the rest of the country. The problem with the equalization formula is this. We're sending about $12 billion a year through our federal taxes to other parts of the country who are in a period of growth while we've been in recession. Quebec is getting $11 billion indirectly from us through equalization. They have 6% unemployment. We've had 9% unemployment. They have a surplus. We have a deficit. We are generous. Albertans are generous. They don't mind sharing some of their good times with others when they're in misfortune. The opposite is true right now. So here's what I propose to do. We use a new power the Supreme Court gave provinces in 1998 in a decision called the Quebec Secession Reference. Basically it says, if a province holds a referendum on a constitutional question and a clear majority votes in favor, it imposes an obligation on the federal government to negotiate that issue with the province in good faith. So I would hold a referendum here, and I'd try to get Saskatchewan to do one concurrent with us, that would give the provincial government a mandate to renegotiate the equalization formula to make it fairer, to stop the automatic increases, and to remove non-renewable resource revenues. Those two changes would dramatically reduce our equalization payment.
Jason Kenney, UCP leadership hopeful. Good luck on October the 28th.
Cheers. Thanks so very much.
Thanks for joining us here on Bridge City News.
Thank you.